Tonight on Primetime Politics, a royal arrival. King Charles lands in Ottawa and immediately begins an afternoon of engagements, asserting Canada's constitutional monarchy and preparing to deliver tomorrow's throne speech. Coming up, we'll examine the timing and the symbolism of the King's visit. Also, a new speaker for the House of Commons.
I would remind members that we are at the beginning of a mandate in the selfish hope that you will afford me a little grace period.
Liberal Francis Scarpaleggia is now charged with maintaining order and decorum in the Commons, but how difficult a job does he have before him? Coming up, we'll speak with former Speaker Geoff Regan. And interim leader for the NDP, Don Davies, on the task before his party in this new parliament. This is Primetime Politics. Hello everyone, I'm Michael Serapio. Well, His Majesty King Charles arrived in the nation's capital today. Accompanied by Queen Camilla, this is a very short visit, but long enough for His Majesty to deliver tomorrow's throne speech. Charles is Canada's head of state, and as King of Canada, he was invited by the Prime Minister to open Parliament after the country's sovereignty was challenged by the U.S. President. Take a listen now to a bit of today's welcoming ceremony. Now, we will have more on the Sovereign's visit coming up a bit later in the program, but we begin our discussions today as Ottawa began this morning, not at the airport where the King arrived, but in the House of Commons, where today MPs elected a new Speaker. Take a look at how the day unfolded with some highlights that include the gentleman usher of the Black Rod, who called on MPs to the Senate, where they were told they needed to elect a new Speaker.
Honourable members of the House of Commons, it is the desire of the Right Honourable Deputy of Her Excellency the Governor-General that this Honourable House attend him immediately in the chamber of the Senate.
A good speaker knows when to keep their speeches short. Can you withdraw my name from the ballot, please?
A fresh start and a real chance to lead by example.
It was in that context that I learned the ropes of the job.
Loving what we do, this place where we do it.
I remember when I was first elected.
Quel que soit notre parti.
A duty to cultivate our parliamentary democracy.
L'honorable député de Lac-Saint-Louis.
When the stakes are so high, often the best thing you can do is allow the players to play a little bit. This is where the government is held to account.
Because this House has rules, it has traditions, and it's on those traditions that our Athenian democracy is founded.
So, a bit of what happened earlier today, including the MPs who agreed to have their names considered, and the announcement of Francis Scarpaleggia as the new Speaker. Well, to talk about this, we're joined by an individual who knows the job very well from 2015 to 2019. Geoff Regan served as the Commons' 36th Speaker, and he joins us right now in studio. Geoff, thank you for being here.
My pleasure, Michael. Thank you.
So listen, the day started out with 8 candidates, 6 Liberals, 2 Conservatives, but immediately the 2 Conservatives, who included Chris D'Entremont, withdrew their names from consideration. Why do you think that happened?
Well, there are a couple of possibilities. They could have decided that they were enjoying, Chris's case, his role as a shadow cabinet minister, as they call it in the Conservative Party. He may have decided that he wanted to support someone else. They may have concluded that they weren't going to win, and so let's have an influence over which Liberal becomes the Speaker. So it's very hard for me to guess whether or not the Conservative caucus internally made some decision about who they would support, or whether they just said, look, we're not going to win, so we're going to let someone else do this.
So they assumed that it would, because traditionally it does go to, the Speaker is a member of the governing party.
Well, traditionally that's the case, but there's no guarantee of it in a minority government. And, I can't think of any cases of this at the federal level, but it may have happened. I've certainly heard of it at the provincial level, where the premier of the day prefers that someone from another party occupy the chair in order to have one more vote on his or her side.
Yeah, well, and to that, we now have a minority government, 3 seats shy of a majority, and now you have one vote taken away because Mr. Scarpaleggia is essentially cannot vote as the Speaker of the House of Commons in case of a tie.
Right.
Right. But that said, how much more difficult is it for a government to get bills passed in a minority situation, and in this case, losing a vote?
Well, so it is more difficult, except that this is clearly, as some have said, a strong minority, and it's a situation where the other parties are not all anxious to have an election right away, and some may want to wait a fair while before they want to have an election, before they feel the public are ready for an election. So that's an advantage for the government. If you look back at the period between 2006 and 2011, Mr. Harper governed with minorities and without having any agreements with other parties, managed to get quite a few things that he wanted to have done, although the opposition parties were able to cause them some headaches here and there.
Headaches here and there, and we do know that this government has an ambitious agenda in a short time frame. But the Speaker often is called the referee of the House of Commons, and we know in the last Parliament, particularly in the last 6 months before it went into prorogation, decorum was in great need. And it often became bitter and toxic. How difficult of a job is it going to be for the new Speaker to bring about decorum in this House, do you think?
Well, it's going to be interesting in the sense that we have a new Parliament. Nearly a third of the MPs are new. We've had an election in which we've seen some people change their approach to things. And will that carry on into the House, or to what degree? Will some members decide, okay, I'm going to treat this differently, and that can determine a lot. We had the situation, of course, last fall with the privilege motion that carried on for a long, long time, which is quite unusual, because normally what happens, of course, is that once the Speaker has found a prima facie case of privilege, then it's very quickly basically agreed by the House to send it to the Procedure and House Affairs Committee, where they consider it, make a report back to the House and recommendation, and then the House
decides. Which the government was calling for under
well, that's
Trudeau.
Normally been the practice, but that's not necessarily, as we saw last fall, how it works, or how it can happen if the opposition has a majority and decides to do otherwise. So yes, the opposition has the numbers, but we do have a different situation, and perhaps there'll be a different climate. Time will tell.
Well, we do know that the Prime Minister is hoping that there will be, I guess, an elevation in the debate. Do you think there's an appetite for that amongst MPs of all parties right now? I think it's a challenge. There's no question that the Speaker's role in this is a challenging one. I certainly found it difficult at times. At times it was very frustrating when you're trying to get the House to perform better, when it is the center point of our democracy and it presents the image of our democracy. For me, it was a big concern, and that's one of the reasons that I was somewhat aggressive in going after members and calling them out for interrupting and for misbehaving in the House when they were, and calling them out. One of the things that a new speaker has to do if you want to do that is you have to very quickly learn all of the faces and constituency names of every member. And when I was there, it was because you can't yell, "Hey, you."
No, you can't, or you can't say Mr. Smith or Ms. Thompson or whatever it is. You have to call them by the member for Halifax West, as I was. You have to refer to the name of their constituency, and so learning those is a challenge. The good news is that the Speaker has a flashcard app that actually is quite helpful.
Okay, well, we'll see how well that app works for the new speaker. You know, before we're done here, you're actually here in Ottawa to attend the throne speech that will be delivered tomorrow by King Charles. I'm wondering, as a former parliamentarian, as a Canadian, when you think about the symbolism of the King of Canada delivering the throne speech, how important is it that Canadians hear that in this moment in time, do you think?
So I think that it's very important symbolically and historically when you consider why Canada developed the way it did. Some of the ways were different from the U.S. We weren't created by revolution. We were created by evolution, a democratic evolution, in the sense that, you know, our democracy and the responsible government, the right of Canadians to govern themselves and to have more and more control, up to the point of the Constitution being signed in 1982 and the ability to change the Constitution here at home. All of those things happened democratically and through discussion and not through a revolution. We have the different history. We have a very different history from the U.S. And the fact that we had people who had to get along, whether it was the First Nations, the Francophones, the English, or all the other people who came from all over the world, who had to get along in this country in a different way than the melting pot to our south. I think that this is an important symbol of our difference and of how we are distinct and unique in the world. And I think that Canadians should be very proud that we are having a moment like this.
Well, certainly we'll be watching very closely here on CPAC and bringing it to viewers right across country. But for this, Mr. Regan, thank you for the time.
Thank you.
Now, as we noted off top, the Speaker's election was not the only big event to happen today in Ottawa, as earlier this afternoon, King Charles did arrive for a 24-hour visit that will include that speech from the throne that I was speaking about with Geoff Regan. Now, that speech will happen tomorrow, but right now, take a look at some of the highlights from this first half of the King's visit today. So just some highlights of the first half of a 24-hour visit with the King and Queen here in Ottawa. And joining us right now is royal commentator and royal historian, Dr. Carolyn Harris. Dr. Harris, good to see you again. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
So listen, I'm going to take a moment, though, to recognize the fact, just to brag at just how great our guest is. You're actually wearing a King Charles III medal. You know your topic so well. You've been recognized by the King himself.
Yes, I received this medal at a ceremony at Queen's Park on the second anniversary of the coronation earlier this month from Her Honor, the Lieutenant Governor of Ontario, Edith Dumont, on behalf of King Charles III. So it's a tremendous honor. The other people at the ceremony, there were First Nations leaders and artists and community leaders and all sorts of incredible people.
Incredible people, as you say, and for our purposes, proves the fact that you come with great credentials to talk about the King's visit to Ottawa.
But, thank you.
So here he is, invited by the Prime Minister to read the throne speech tomorrow. Now, part of this has to do with Donald Trump and how Donald Trump essentially mocked Canada's sovereignty, mocked Canada's Prime Minister. How does the King's presence, reading the throne speech tomorrow, assert Canadian nationalism?
Well, the King as head of state is the personification of the state, and by coming to Canada on the advice of Prime Minister Mark Carney to read the throne speech, he is showcasing Canada's distinctive political history and traditions that are very different from American political traditions. When the American Revolution took place and the United States broke away from the Crown, thousands of loyalists settled in Canada. And it's interesting to see in the 19th century, in the early 20th century, loyalty to the Crown was something that made Canada distinct from the United States. And we're now seeing another historical moment when there's a very strong focus on what makes Canada different from the United States. So the monarchy, which many people thought was gradually fading in significance for many Canadians, is now receiving fresh attention as this distinctive aspect of Canadian history and politics.
Well, fresh attention, as you say, and as we can see from the video right now, thousands of people coming out to greet the King, which was no certainty that would happen, but that is what we witnessed as we take a look at some of the visuals from Lansdowne Park in Ottawa earlier this afternoon. But, you know, I have to note the fact that the King and Buckingham Palace was criticized back in February because of the meeting that Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, had with Donald Trump. He hand-delivered to him an invitation from the King to meet him at Balmoral, and Canadians were looking for the King, for the sovereign, to stand up for this country as King of Canada. How difficult has this all been for Buckingham Palace, do you think?
Well, King Charles III's in a very difficult diplomatic situation because he is King of the United Kingdom, King of Canada, King of 13 other Commonwealth realms that all have their own histories and their own foreign policy and are all trying to navigate the uncertain situation in the United States. So in his capacity as King of the United Kingdom, King Charles III took the advice of his British Prime Minister and issued that invitation for a state visit, as Prime Minister Keir Starmer is very focused on harmonious trade relations with the United States. But in his capacity as King of Canada, King Charles III accepted an invitation from Prime Minister Carney to open Parliament here in Canada. So we're seeing these two very distinctive roles, King of the United Kingdom and King of Canada. And all of the events today showcase King Charles III in his capacity as King of Canada.
King of Canada, although I think it's fair to say there are questions as to whether, or rather questions as to how important Canada is to the King. What would you say to that?
Well, King Charles III has a very long relationship with Canada that goes back to 1970 when he visited in another delicate political situation. It was the Cold War. The United States was wondering about Canadian sovereignty over the Arctic, which was quite sparsely populated at that time. So Prince Charles, as he then was, Queen Elizabeth II, Prince Philip, Princess Anne, all visited for the 100th anniversary of the Northwest Territories, and they didn't simply visit Yellowknife, which had received a royal visit before, but they went to Tuktoyaktuk, they went to Iqaluit, and all of the world's press were therefore focused on the Arctic Circle, the royal visit, everything from the Inuit delegations greeting them to the fashions of the tour that had to be suited to some of these remote areas. So the amount of press coverage of that royal tour had a way of subtly affirming Canada's sovereignty in the Arctic because of this very high-profile royal visit. And we noticed that Prince Charles spent a lot of time in the Arctic in the 1970s. He even went under ice diving in 1975. So King Charles III, as Prince of Wales, has traveled quite extensively in Canada, and it's clear it's not simply obviously in official capacity, that he really has enjoyed hiking, skiing, and even under ice diving, that Canada's landscapes have really spoken to him.
And to that, this is in fact the King's 20th visit, his first as King, but
Yes.
20th visit to Canada as a member of the royal family. Listen, very quickly, running out of time, what do you hope comes out of this royal visit? Given this moment in Canadian nationalism, what do you hope comes out of this, very quickly?
I hope that what comes out of this is a renewed understanding of King Charles III's role as King of Canada, and there being a greater interest generally in Canada's history and Westminster political system.
Well, Dr. Carolyn Harris, as I said, no better guest to speak about this today. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Well, New Democrats will not be recognized as an official party in the House of Commons. That decision delivered by the government House Leader today, Steve McKinnon. Now, the NDP won only 7 seats in the general election, 5 less than what's needed to be recognized as an official party. But the interim NDP leader had hoped that an exception could be made, but again, that exception will not be made. And to talk about this right now is the interim leader for the NDP, Don Davies. Don, thank you for making your way to studio.
Nice to be with you, Michael.
So, you know, I have to begin first and foremost with your reaction to the very fact that the government, despite the arguments you have made, will not be recognizing the NDP as an official party in the Commons.
Well, first of all, that's not exactly what the government has said. What they said was that to recognize us as an official party would require a legislative change, and that they couldn't do so unilaterally. So that's what actually Steve McKinnon, the House Leader for Liberals, did say today. But, you know, it's not really about that. It's there's other routes that are available to us. What we're really interested in as the New Democrats is to bring the voices of 1.2 million Canadians who voted for us, all those working families who want us to advocate for affordable housing, for good family-sustaining jobs, better health care, to bring that voice effectively to the House of Commons. And what we're seeking is the tools that will help us to do that. And those tools are available to us through the Board of Internal Economy. And so there's different routes to getting those resources that we need, and we're having fruitful discussions with all the parties towards that goal.
Okay, so discussions that might get you resources, which is given to parties that have official recognition in the Commons. But let me get back to what you said earlier, because my read of it was that Steve McKinnon said he would not be officially, not extend the official party status because that would be not following the law. So does that mean then you're going to pursue a change in that law if he talks about not legislatively acceptable as it currently stands?
No, there's the government controls resources, and they do so through the Board of Internal Economy, which it also operates under its own bylaws. And again, what we're interested in is getting the legislative research and communication support that we need to do our job and deliver for Canadians. And there are no hard and set rules for that. There are 7 of us as a national party, and the recognized party definition in the Parliament of Canada Act really is just one route. The other route that's available is through the Board of Internal Economy, and governments can control how those resources go. I would hasten to point out, Michael, that one thing that's very important to consider about this is we're in a minority parliament. And the Liberals have 169 seats, we have 7. You need 172 to get things passed. So I think it's in everybody's interest that the parties who are able to be a balance of power have the ability to function. You know that Parliament is very complex. It moves fast and it changes. And so all we're asking for is the ability to understand what legislation is coming, to be able to analyze it properly, so we can be a reliable actor in Parliament. And again, most parties are in agreement with that.
Okay, so very quickly then, are you going to drop legislative change to try to get the official? I know there's an alternate way to get the funding that you're looking for, but does that mean that the negotiations to get official status are now off the table? That's not going to happen.
No, I think they're still on the table. It's just one route. I mean, it seems like getting a change to the legislation, Michael, is a long shot, but there are other routes. I mean, we're happy with whichever.
But if the Liberals and you united on that legislative change, you have a majority to make that happen.
It could happen. Yeah, it could happen. But there's different routes for this. And again, we're going to do our job no matter what. I mean, we're going to bring those voices to Parliament no matter what. We just think that having the tools that we need to be effective advocates for those policies is good for Canadians, good for Canada, good for Parliament. So that's our argument.
Is there horse trading happening now then? Are you talking to the government about helping them pass a legislative agenda in order to get official status?
Not at all, no. In fact, we've ruled that out, and so have the Liberals. We're not pursuing any kind of agreement. What we're saying is that in a fluid environment like this, making sure that we know when the votes are, we can properly assess legislation that's being brought forward. We can, we understand when changes are happening in Parliament will only help the New Democrats function better. And again, our priority is, how do we get affordable housing? How do we get better jobs for Canadians? How do we improve our healthcare system? How do we have a better, united, strong, independent Canada in the face of Mr. Trump's threats? That's the New Democrats' real motivation here. And we don't apologize for trying to get the tools that we need to improve our ability to do that. So we're going to keep doing it.
I guess part of the problem, or the sticking point for me, is that without official party status, you are not guaranteed a question during QP. You are not necessarily guaranteed a spot in committee. How do you effectively make the argument for your party if you're not seen daily asking questions, raising questions at the committee level? How do you prevent being ignored?
Well, actually, the part of this discussion that we opened up, Michael, is already bearing fruit in that regard. So, for instance, to your question, we found out just about an hour ago that the independents in Parliament, as we're referred to, will get 8 questions a week. So the NDP, being 7, will get 7 questions a week, which means we're going to be in question period every single day. In fact, twice a day on some days. So these are the kind of accomplishments, these are the kind of products that happen when we talk to one another. And so the NDP is going to be a voice in question period every day. Committees are another issue, you're right. That remains unresolved at this point. But we're going to be in question period. We're going to have statements in the House. We're going to be active participants in debate. And we're going to be a strong national voice for working people in this country. And this is something that we don't apologize to anybody for pursuing. It's going to make Parliament and government better.
Yeah, and I will say, and I completely have respect for the agenda that you're setting out for yourself for Canadians across this country. But I do wonder, your party has been reduced. It's now just 7 seats, down from 25. What would you have done better? What do you think the party could have done better in the last election? Because it didn't have to be this way.
Yeah, that's a fair question, Michael. And we had a tough election. There's no hiding that. That's why I think as leader of the party for an interim period, it's very important for us to create an honest, thorough assessment to understand where we came from. And I think just as importantly, to chart a path forward so that we can have a renewed reimagining of a progressive option for Canadians. So I don't want to second guess or second guess isn't the right word. I don't want to anticipate what our membership would have input into that question, because I do think it's important to talk to members across this country, supporters, grassroots activists, progressive allies, and get their views on where we failed to connect with people. My own view, and I think we get a lot of agreement for this, is somehow there has been a disconnect between the NDP and our working class base. I think that's pretty obvious at this point. And that's something that I personally want to address right away, regardless of any kind of evaluation process. I'm going to meet people in where they work, in at union meetings, in gig workers, service sector workers, healthcare workers, public sector workers, go in and meet them where they're at and start reconnecting and listening to workers to find out where did we go wrong and how can we reconnect.
Okay. Well, Don Davies, we will speak more during this Parliament. Thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Always a pleasure, Michael. Thank you.
And that is Primetime Politics for this Monday. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Primetime Politics is back tomorrow evening, but do join us tomorrow as we broadcast a special on the throne speech delivered by King Charles. Have a good evening.